Hello and welcome back to the channel. This week I have been in court, and no, I don't stand accused of any crimes, as fortunately my mangling of foreign names, particularly German names, is not a criminal offence in the UK. So I was actually in court because I was on the jury. And for anyone who is not familiar with the British legal system, juries are chosen completely at random. But I'm not going to talk about that or the trial itself, not least because legally I'm not allowed to. The purpose of this video is to talk about the barristers, the techniques and the tricks that they use. And the reason why I want to talk about that is because as I was sitting in court listening to them, going through the evidence, cross-examining the witness and so on, it did strike me that a lot of the techniques that they were using have quite a lot of parallels to various negotiation techniques that I talk about on this channel. So for anyone who wants to improve their negotiation skills, and particularly anyone who is a lawyer or has legal training and finds themselves in a negotiation scenario, then I encourage you to watch and listen to this video because there are various things in here that I want to talk about that I think will be very useful to you. And to anyone not familiar with this channel, I am the collaborative negotiator. That means I'm a negotiator of over 10 years worth of professional experience, and I like to use this channel to talk about a variety of topics, some political and some tutorial. This video is more on the tutorial side of things. So let's start with a bit of a question. For anyone familiar with negotiations, they will notice a very common theme that many negotiators tend to be either lawyers or have had legal training. And there is a reason for this. This is because as a result of going to law school, those individuals would have been taught the importance of being organised, focusing on details, establishing what are facts and what are judgments or assumptions or opinions. And putting all of that together to deconstruct the case, if you like, go through all the evidence, all the bits, and to pick out what is important, are skills that are usually trained into lawyers. So that's one reason. Another reason is that quite often negotiations will delve into legal matters. So, for example, it could be about divorce law or contract law, commercial law, anything like that. So that is why quite often lawyers find themselves being turning into negotiators. But here's the crucial thing: being a good negotiator is not necessarily the same thing as being a good lawyer. And it is important to understand those differences if you want to be good in either category. So let's delve a little bit further into that. So here, I'm going to just recap what I always teach people about negotiations on this channel. And that effectively there's two extremes when it comes to negotiation. The first one is adversarial. And to be brutally honest, this is mainly what legal training is about, particularly in the UK or US systems, which are based very much on the adversarial system of legal practice. Over in Europe, it's a bit different. There is an inquisitorial system, but that's a bit different. I'll come on to that later. So coming back to adversarial, if you are in an adversarial negotiation, then what you are doing is you're negotiating with someone else who has very different goals, very different objectives from you. So as a result of that, you are in a confrontation or in competition. That means that in terms of how you pursue that negotiation, you will be trying to give away as little information as possible whilst obtaining as much information as possible from the other side to help improve your position. And of course, you will be perhaps stubborn, you may be saying no a lot, you will be raising various arguments, You'll be using whatever techniques you can to advance your position, usually to the detriment of the other side, and the adversarial nature. So that is one extreme. At the other extreme of the negotiation spectrum is collaborative. And this is my particular speciality. And this is because when it comes to doing big negotiations, when you're talking big sums of money perhaps, or big projects that might take a long time, or more specifically, a scenario where the person you or the people you're negotiating with need to become trusted partners. And this is one of the key differences between adversarial and collaborative. At the end of the adversarial negotiation, you don't need that other side to be the trusted partner. You might have agreed what it is you want to buy or sell, and then you walk away. That's it. You don't have to see them again. Whereas in a collaborative style negotiation, quite often, there's two defining features. One is some form of relationship post the negotiation phase. So, for example, you might decide that you're going to build a massive business park with a developer. Well, that's not going to happen in one day. Once you've agreed it, that's going to be months, if not years, worth of effort. Therefore, that developer to you is a partner. Therefore, when you're negotiating with them, you're negotiating not only to establish how much it will be cost, how much you're willing to pay, and the parameters of all the things you want and they want, but also to establish a trusting relationship so that you and that developer will continue to work together on that project for a long period of time. So that is why when it comes to collaborative negotiation, you want to be sharing as much information as possible. You want to be establishing what are the concerns of the other side so that you can take action to address those, as well as expressing your concerns so that they can help you address those too. Now, of course, these are extremes, and you get a lot in the middle of these 2 points. And this is where it struck me when I was listening to the barristers in court this week. Because while they were very much in an adversarial style negotiation, this wasn't like TV. They were not just throwing out lots of random things and trying to trap people. What they were doing was using a very inquisitorial style, almost collaborative, in terms of their cross-examination. This is because they were going through all the evidence in a very methodical and facts-based way. And the whole point of that was to build a picture at the end of it, to build a conclusion that was as well informed or as well evidenced as it was possible to make it. So in that sort of scenario, although they might have been adversarial in terms of the context, being in a criminal trial, the techniques they were using were a little bit more on the collaborative side, to obtain that information, to understand the parameters of the other side, in order for them to present their case, their conclusion, and so on, for the judgment of the course. And it's important to understand that, because that is important when you're trying to do a negotiation, that those similar techniques, those similar ways of approaching the problem are extremely useful to negotiators. And that is why, quite often, lawyers do become negotiators. They are meant to understand those techniques and to use them. But they need to be careful, because there are a few traps in doing that. So let's focus a little bit on what is the secret, if you like, to being a good negotiator. And I've done this in various other videos, covering this from various angles. So this may be familiar to regular followers of this channel, but I'll go over it again. Key to this is details. And many people have the misconception that negotiation is perhaps about bluffing, about being a good communicator, about being someone that thinks fast on your feet. The reality is that is not the case, especially not when you're doing big collaborative style negotiation. It is all about the details. And getting into the details is all about preparation. So this is where having that legal mindset is very handy. You will quiz every single detail, and you will pick out what perhaps does not fit, or what conflicts, what perhaps needs further examination because it does not match up with other information that you have. And this is why, in my case, many negotiations are actually about that. They're not about trying to push the other side into moving their position. Quite often the conversation is, can you explain this, or what does this mean type of question. And that is because you're trying to understand the details in order to make an informed decision. So as a result of doing that, many negotiations, rather than being pushy, if you like, are actually quite inquisitorial. The common technique I use in my negotiations is I just ask lots of questions. I don't really voice opinion very often. I don't make sweeping statements or anything like that. I ask lots of questions. And that is because I'm trying to understand the other side. I'm trying to understand the parameters of the negotiation, what influences it from both sides, and what needs to be addressed going forward. And so you don't really do that by coming to a negotiation with the intent of putting forward your own view. What you need to do is you need to be very systematic and very organized. You need to understand all the potential flashpoints, all the inconsistencies, and your own positions and red lines, and what you don't know about the other side in terms of their positions and their red lines. And having organized, prepared yourself in that way for the negotiation, you then turn up to the negotiation with the intent, specific purpose of active listening. So a good negotiator in many ways isn't the one that's there trying to say what their position is. They're there to listen to what the other side says their position is. So what that means is that and the information can be weaponized in a way, and that is something that barristers definitely understand. They're there pushing for information because they can then use that to build a case, to make an argument. In the same way, but in a less aggressive way, a good negotiator does the same thing. They turn up to negotiation and they ask the other side to talk a lot, to explain things. And of course, they themselves will respond back to questions, particularly if the other side has competent negotiators who do the same thing. Having done all of that, having gotten into the details, having prepared, having understood all the parameters, all the conflict areas that need to be addressed going forward, that is the point that you start to deploy perhaps persuading techniques. So that is where you put forward your case. You say to the other side, I think we should do this, and actually I think you're price-wise, you need to reduce that, for example. But here's one of the things, and again this struck me in some of the legal arguments that I listened to this week. To really make a strong case, whether legal or in negotiation context, you want to apply facts as much as possible. So listen to anyone when they talk, and do this with politicians as well. This is why I talk about political issues a lot. Because when you listen to politicians, they very rarely talk about anything factual. They talk a lot on the emotive sort of side of the spectrum. This is because they are trying to persuade you to their case based upon opinions and feeling. Whereas a good negotiator stroke lawyer knows that perhaps that can work, but if you're up against professionals, that absolutely does not work. So particularly if you're up against other other negotiators who are legally trained, they will accept you saying, for example, I am aware that the price of obtaining these goods are X. You are quoting me a very significant Y above that. We perhaps think that is a bit too high, and that therefore, you might want to bring that down. Rather than, for example, saying, oh, we're not quite happy with your quote, make it lower. You're saying the same thing, but you're saying it in different ways. You're pointing out to the other side that you have information and facts that dictate your position. You're not doing it because of gut instincts or because you feel like it. You're doing it because you have gathered evidence that says that your position can be based upon. So that is one of the key things to understand when going into negotiations, is you have to understand what are you presenting that is factual, and when are you, because in negotiation you can't always apply facts. Sometimes you do have to offer an opinion based upon assumptions. For example, you might say that this project will only take 1 year. You are basing that on your opinion or assumption based on perhaps on previous projects, on professional experience, what you have been told, whatever it may be. But it's not an actual fact that that project will take specifically 1 year. Things can happen, things can go wrong, things need to be corrected. There will be a whole host of things that can alter what you're saying there, in the real world. So sometimes when doing a negotiation, you have to make a decision when to articulate that. So for example, you might say, based on everything that we have gathered so far, we believe this will take a year. However, for the purpose of ensuring, a good trusting relationship, maybe we should allocate 14 to 15 months to this project. There's the negotiation position that you're putting to the other side, using or clearly articulating the assumption that it's based upon. And that is, again, a difference between a collaborative and adversarial negotiation. In an adversarial negotiation, you would just say 12 months. You wouldn't justify it. You wouldn't explain around it. In an inquisitorial stroke collaborative situation, you would put more information around it, because you're trying to clearly articulate to the other side why those dates are important or why you need flexibility. And this perhaps can be one of the dangers for anyone who's legally trained, is that in being pedantic about the details, which in certain contexts is a good thing, but in this sort of scenario, you have to accept that those details may not be available. And if you approach the negotiation with that legal, black and white type mindset, then you're veering more towards the adversarial side of the spectrum than the collaborative. And that is not always appropriate. And finally, and certainly not least, is critical thinking, critical analysis. And you don't have to be legally trained to be able to apply that. There's a whole host of ways in which people can gain those skills. And this is why I talk about the political stuff quite a lot. So, because you can look at those and think, how can I critically analyze this scenario to understand the weaknesses in that side's negotiation position? And this is why we talk about the Northern Ireland Protocol and the UK government position on it. You look at it and there's lots of sweeping statements. There's lots of opinion. What there is very little of is factual evidence that justifies their positions. And that is why it's very easy to criticise things like the UK government's position on the Northern Ireland Protocol, to name one of many issues that have been critical recently. This is because anyone, whether a good lawyer, whether a good negotiator, whether a good politician even, has that ability to critically analyse the issue and draw valid conclusions on the information available. And that is absolutely critical in any negotiation. Further to that, you need to apply it both ways. So never go into negotiation thinking you are going to be perfect. Everybody makes mistakes. We're all human, and negotiations quite often are about judgment. You present facts as much as possible to help everyone make good judgment, but that is not always possible. And so when you finish or come out of the negotiation, or even when you're in the middle of any negotiation, what is important is self-improvement. And you do that by critically analysing your performance. What did you do that you thought went well? What did you perhaps do that you thought didn't go quite so well? Including you made a proposal to the other side and they rejected it. And you might have to look and think, okay, what did I do wrong that led to them rejecting that proposal? So having that ability to be quite honest with yourself is really important to a negotiator, in terms of being able to improve how they negotiate in the future. And that sometimes can be a little bit difficult for the legally trained people, because that training is very much about being rigidly right at all times, because that is what the law says type thing. You slightly need to break that training in order to apply this critical thinking process in a way that is helpful to negotiation. So some concluding remarks on this. Lawyers are great for focusing on the details, and they apply critical thinking. They understand what is factual, what is non-factual, what is compliant, what is not compliant. The training is all about making those decisions based on looking at all the evidence, looking at the law, looking at the documentation, going into it, and applying inquisitorial techniques to make sure you fully understand the situation. And that is great, certainly for the preparation stage of any negotiation and the analysis stage. But it doesn't necessarily work very well when you're sitting around the negotiation table. And this is why I do advise many people when they go to negotiations not to take the lawyer, which may offend some of my lawyer friends. But they do understand the importance of having that collaborative style. So this doesn't mean a lawyer cannot be an excellent negotiator. They absolutely can. But what they have to understand is that they need to apply that legal training and that legal process in terms of all the preparation and in terms of understanding what issues they want to discuss at the negotiation. But when they're at that negotiation, either they're there to observe, to provide the critical analysis to support the negotiation, or if they are there to actually conduct the negotiation, then they must apply more collaborative techniques in order to allow that negotiation to proceed effectively. Because if they apply the very pedantic adversarial style legal techniques, that tends to make the negotiation slower and more hostile. It is actually not as productive as you would hope. But there are exceptions to this. That's why I put that a little bit at the end. So, unless appropriate. If you are in a negotiation, for example, which is about legal matters, or negotiating a contract in an adversarial context, or where you don't trust the other side, or you really need to pin down a lot of technical detail, then the more adversarial techniques can be more appropriate. And it is important to understand when that is. There are no easy rules here. I've set out a broad framework of skill sets and approaches that people use. But at the end of the day, it comes down to applying judgment. And good negotiators are all about understanding facts, but also understanding when they need to apply judgment, when the fact is not necessarily as fully available as you might like. So I hope you found this video interesting and helpful for you. I wish anyone luck who is trying to conduct a negotiation. I ask that you do bear the principles in mind. And of course, any experiences, lessons, or even challenges that people may wish to make to what I've said in this video, then please do put those in the comment box below. And if you do enjoy some of the more tutorial style videos, then please do like this video. Thank you.